So we got a really specific, really fascinating request from a listener recently.
Oh, yeah, we did. And I was so excited to dig into this one.
Right. They wanted us to do a comprehensive, detailed deep dive into a very specific academic subject.
Specifically, they asked for a conversational format, just two people talking through it, to really unpack this course called Research Methodology in Buddhism.
Exactly. And this is a subject taught by Assistant Professor Dr. Khantong Wattanapradith. She teaches this at the International Buddhist Studies College, which is part of Mahachula Rajavidyalaya University in Thailand.
It is an incredible collection of material to go through. We're looking at a complete course syllabus, detailed lecture notes, and a published 2016 field study by Dr. Khantong.
Yeah, and I gotta say, what we're looking at here isn't just like a philosophical discussion about religion.
No, not at all. She is proposing a highly rigorous step-by-step framework for actually diagnosing societal conflicts and, well, engineering sustainable peace.
Right, and the core premise here, the thing that really caught my attention right off the bat, is this idea that you can look at the Buddha as essentially the world's first qualitative researcher.
Which is such a wild paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Because normally, when we think of an academic researcher, we picture total detachment, right?
Totally. You picture someone with a clipboard standing behind a one-way mirror, trying their hardest not to contaminate the environment. The whole goal is to separate yourself from the subject.
Exactly. But this methodology completely flips that on its head.
It really does. And before we get into the actual mechanics of how this Buddhist research framework operates in the field, I want to ask you, the listener, to do something really quick.
Yeah, this is a great exercise. Take a few seconds right now and think of one unresolved conflict that you're personally familiar with.
It could be, a toxic dynamic at your workplace, or maybe an ongoing argument in your family.
Or even a larger political divide in your local community.
Right.
Just hold that specific conflict in your mind as we go through this.
Because by the time we finish going through these sources, you'll hopefully have a completely new structural framework for analyzing it and, potentially even solving it.
So if we're going to talk about a new way to do research, we have to start with how we actually view knowledge itself, right?
Right. Because in standard Western academia, we have pretty rigid schools of thought about this. You've got positivism, which says, everything has to be objectively measured with hard numbers.
Yes, the hard data approach.
And then you have interpretivism, which focuses more on lived experiences. But Dr. Khantong's syllabus introduces Buddhist epistemology.
Specifically, this concept of Buddhapanya.
Right. So how does Buddhapanya actually differ from the Western approach we're all used to?
Well, the main difference lies in the ultimate goal of the researcher. In traditional Western epistemology, the goal of research is almost always external.
Meaning you want to change something outside of yourself.
Exactly. You want to transform your knowledge of the world so you can publish a paper, build a new theory, or solve an external problem.
But Buddhapanya, which translates to Buddhist wisdom, that demands an internal process, doesn't it?
It does. It requires the inner transformation of the researcher alongside the research itself.
Wow. So you can't just change the world. You have to actively change yourself in the process.
Right. It's non-negotiable.
That's a huge shift from the Western standard. So practically speaking, how does a researcher actually get to that point of wisdom?
The syllabus outlines 3 progressive levels of knowledge to get there. It starts with sanya.
Okay, sanyan. And if I'm reading this right, sanya is basically just raw perception, right? Like the base level.
Exactly. Sanya is your raw data collection. It's the sensory impressions, the unedited interview transcripts, the hard numbers.
But obviously, just having data doesn't mean much on its own.
No, you have to interpret it. Which brings us to the second level, which is dihi.
And dihi translates to view or opinion, right?
Yes, precisely.
So if I'm applying this to a standard academic paper, dihi would be my conceptual framework. It's the literature review.
That's a great way to put it. It's you taking that raw data from level 1 and filtering it through your own ideological lens or your personal values.
And in a lot of standard academic research, the process basically stops right there.
Oh, absolutely it does. You collect your data, you apply your theoretical lens, and you publish your findings.
Boom, thesis done. But Buddhist epistemology argues that this level is still, contaminated by your personal biases, right?
Yes. That's why it requires a third level, which is niya. And this translates to direct, purified wisdom or insight.
Purified insight. So what does that actually look like for the researcher?
It's a state of understanding where the researcher has actively freed their mind from bias. This leads to findings that are genuinely transformative, rather than just reinforcing what the researcher already believed going into the study.
I'm trying to picture how this actually works in practice, because in Western science, we sort of treat the researcher like a thermometer.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, we just assume the thermometer is perfectly calibrated from the factory, so we stick it in the beaker, read the numbers, and trust the data completely.
Right, assuming the instrument is flawless.
But this Buddhist methodology seems to say, wait a minute, you're a human being. Your internal thermometer is probably broken, or at least heavily biased.
That's definitely
So
biased.
you have to spend half your time calibrating the instrument, which is your own mind, while you're trying to measure the liquid.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. You're constantly monitoring the external data, but you are simultaneously monitoring your own internal processing of that data.
But I've got to push back on this a little bit.
Go for it.
If a researcher is constantly focusing on their own inner state, what the text calls yoniso manasikara, or wise reflexivity, doesn't that just invite a ton of subjectivity?
I see where you're going with this.
Like, if I'm defending a sociology thesis, my committee doesn't care about my personal spiritual journey. They care about my methodology being objective and detached. Doesn't focusing on your own mind sort of ruin the objectivity?
It's a really common critique, for sure. But the Buddhist framework argues that pure, detached objectivity is a complete myth anyway.
Really? A myth?
Yes, because every human being brings defilements, blind spots, and historical biases into the field with them. You can't just pretend they don't exist just because you put on a white lab coat.
Okay, that's fair. So it's better to admit the thermometer is broken than to pretend it's perfect.
Precisely. In Buddhist empiricism, practicing yoniso manasikara, that wise, reflective attention, is actually the ultimate form of rigorous bias checking.
Oh, I see.
You aren't becoming more subjective. You're systematically identifying your subjective biases so you can neutralize them before they contaminate your data.
That makes a lot of sense. You can't account for a bias you refuse to admit you have.
Exactly.
So once a researcher has adopted this, like, dual lens mindset, how do they actually structure the research?
This is where the lecture notes do something really clever. Dr. Khantong takes a 2,500-year-old teaching the Four Noble Truths, or Aryalaka 4, and maps it directly onto the structure of a modern academic thesis.
It's such a brilliant structural alignment. Most people know the Four Noble Truths as a religious doctrine, but here they operate as a systematic investigative method.
Let's look at the first truth, which is dukkha. Usually this is translated as suffering.
Right, but in a research context, what is suffering? It's the conflict, the injustice, or the gap in knowledge.
Exactly.
So if I'm writing a thesis, dukkha is literally chapter 1. It's the problem statement.
Yes. You're clearly defining the specific suffering this research is attempting to address.
Which naturally leads to the second truth, samudaya, which is the cause of the suffering.
Because you can't solve a problem until you know its origins.
Right. So for a researcher, this is your root cause analysis and your literature review. You're formulating questions to figure out why this specific suffering exists in the first place.
And once you figure out the cause, you need an objective. That brings us to the third truth, nirodha, which means cessation.
So in an academic paper, this would be your research objective. You're painting a clear picture of what the complete absence of this suffering would look like.
Yes. Nirodha is the envisioned peaceful outcome. And finally, you have magga, which is the path to actually get there.
In academia, this is your research design and methodology, right?
Correct. It's the specific, actionable interventions you're going to use to move the community from the problem to the solution.
Problem, cause, goal, method. Dukkha, samudaya, nirodha, magga. It's a complete blueprint.
It really is.
But, realizing that a community is suffering is honestly the easy part. Diagnosing why it's happening, that second step, samudaya, is incredibly difficult.
Oh, absolutely.
How does this methodology actually help a researcher diagnose the root cause of a conflict out in the field?
This is where we get into the really granular diagnostic tools. The course materials provide a specific root cause framework for conflict, and it's split into two distinct levels.
Okay, 2 levels.
And this distinction is crucial. The first level looks at the individual drivers of conflict, which are known as the kilesa, or the 3 poisons.
Which are greed, hatred, and delusion. But we aren't talking about these in a vague, moralistic way, right? Like, how do these show up as actual data points in field research?
Let's apply a sociological lens to them. Greed, or lobha, shows up as resource competition.
Like land disputes.
Yes, land disputes, corporate monopolies, one group wanting the material wealth of another group. Then you have hatred, or dosa, which manifests as active discrimination, racism, and intergroup violence.
And the third one, delusion.
Delusion, or moha, is structural blindness. its unexamined biases, and the widespread acceptance of misinformation.
Okay, I can definitely see how those drive individual behavior. But a full-scale community conflict is rarely just one person's greed, you know?
Oh, it's bigger than that.
So how does this framework explain when a conflict scales up and infects a whole system?
That brings us to the second level of the diagnosis. The framework calls these the Papanyaka, or the three proliferators.
Proliferators, I like that word.
You can think of them as the systemic amplifiers that take those individual poisons and basically mutate them into structural drivers of conflict.
Okay, so what are these amplifiers?
Versus craving, or tatun. This is the systemic escalation of greed. It's an entire economy built on unsustainable exploitation.
Got it. And the second?
Second is conceit, or mana. This is hierarchical thinking. It's a society rigidly obsessed with status, constantly comparing itself, creating a hardline us versus them identity.
And the third amplifier?
The third is fixed views, or dihi. This is ideological rigidity. It's an absolute fundamentalist refusal to listen to any other perspective.
Which inevitably leads to a complete breakdown of dialogue.
Exactly.
It is honestly eerie how well that maps onto modern society. I mean, when you describe conceit as an obsessive us versus them identity and fixed views as an absolute refusal to listen to new information, you're basically describing the architecture of social media polarization.
100%.
We're all practically swimming in Papanyaka.
We really are. And for a researcher trying to build peace, you have to diagnose which amplifier you're dealing with.
Right, because the treatment would change.
Exactly. An intervention for a community suffering from resource craving is going to look very, very different than an intervention for a community trapped in fixed ideological views.
I see the utility in that, for sure. But I have a major concern here, and I want to see how the framework handles it.
Let's hear it.
If a researcher from a fancy university walks into a marginalized, conflict-torn community and starts diagnosing them with, quote, delusion or craving, isn't that incredibly arrogant?
It can be, yes.
Doesn't the researcher risk exhibiting mana conceit by treating these real people like defective subjects that need to be fixed by some academic savior?
That is a phenomenal critique, and it cuts right to the heart of why Buddhist epistemology requires that inner calibration we talked about earlier.
The Yoni-Samana-Sakara.
Exactly. If a researcher walks into a community with a savior complex, believing they hold superior wisdom and the locals are just ignorant data points, they're actively injecting their own mana into the conflict.
So they actually become a proliferator of the violence themselves.
Precisely. They're essentially contaminating their own field site.
Wow.
This is why Yoni-Samana-Sakara is non-negotiable. Before a researcher can diagnose the Papanyaka of a community, they are structurally required to analyze and document their own kilesa.
So if they don't neutralize their own conceit first, their methodology is basically just intellectual colonialism disguised as peace building.
That's a very sharp way to put it, but yes, it's a mandatory humility check built right into the method.
I love that. So let's say the researcher actually does the internal work. They check their ego. They accurately diagnose that a community is suffering from, say, systemic fixed views.
Okay.
But diagnosing the illness doesn't cure the patient. What's the actual prescription? How do they intervene?
This moves us from the diagnostic phase into the MAGA phase, the method.
Right, the fourth noble truth.
Yes. The syllabus introduces a toolkit called the 4 Right Efforts, or PANA 4. This acts as a compass to tell researchers exactly what kind of intervention is appropriate, based on where the community is in the timeline of the conflict.
Can you break those 4 efforts down for us? How do they work mechanically?
Sure. The first effort is Savara, which means prevention. This is deployed before violence erupts.
So early warning stuff.
Right. If a researcher sees the early warning signs of an us versus them identity forming, the intervention focuses on preventative policies, mediated dialogues, and early warning systems.
But what if it's too late for prevention? What if the conflict has already boiled over into violence?
Then you move to the second effort, which is Pahana, or elimination. This is the acute phase. The intervention here is all about active conflict resolution, stopping the immediate physical violence and providing immediate trauma care.
Okay, so let me give you a scenario to see how this compass actually functions in practice. Pop quiz time.
Bring it on.
Let's say a community has been in a violent conflict for 5 years. But yesterday, leadership from both sides finally signed a peace treaty. The violence has officially stopped.
Okay.
As a researcher, which of the 4 efforts are you designing your intervention around?
In that scenario, you are standing right on the boundary line between the second and third efforts.
Interesting. Why is that?
Well, the treaty means you've achieved Pahana, the elimination of direct violence. But the trauma is incredibly fresh. If you stop there, you only have negative peace.
Just the absence of violence, but no actual healing.
Exactly. So the researcher must urgently design interventions around the third effort, which is bhavana, or cultivation.
And how does cultivation work on the ground? Like, what exactly are you cultivating?
You're actively building positive peace capacities. This means designing programs for restorative justice, creating safe spaces for grief sharing, and structurally rebuilding empathy between the fractured groups.
You are cultivating the conditions where peace can actually grow, which naturally leads to the fourth effort, I'm assuming, making sure that peace lasts.
You got it. That's anurakana, or maintenance. This is institutionalizing that culture of peace through education systems, equitable laws, and collaborative governance.
So the root causes of the conflict don't quietly regenerate.
Right.
It's such a logical progression. And to see how all these high-level theories actually survive contact with reality, I want to look at Dr. Khanthong's 2016 field work.
Oh, this is where it gets really practical.
Yeah, she went into conflict-affected communities in Thailand and applied this methodology empirically. And out of that research, she developed something called the D&P line model.
Right, and it looks like a literal equation for peace building.
It really does read like an equation. And it's a great synthesis of everything we've discussed so far.
The model lays out the required variables for sustainable community development. The D stands for Dhamma, but in this context, it's defined as a broad ethical foundation.
So it's not strictly religious.
No, it doesn't matter if the community is Buddhist, Muslim, or Christian. There has to be a shared normative anchor of ethical values.
And the P?
The P stands for peaceful means, which is a shared commitment to nonviolent processes, like choosing mediation over retaliation.
Okay, so the Dhamma and peaceful means are the foundation. Then we have the variables inside the parentheses, which are L, I, N, E. How do these community capacities function?
These are the structural pillars. L is for an ethical leader. I is for intellectual development, meaning the community is cultivating critical thinking and wisdom to see through misinformation.
Got it. And the N and E?
N stands for network, which is the web of interconnected relationships that cross over tribal boundaries. And E is for emotional development.
Let me stop you there for a second. How does a researcher facilitate emotional development in a post-conflict zone? That sounds incredibly difficult to engineer.
It is difficult, but it ties directly back to the cultivation phase we just talked about.
Oh, the bhavana.
Exactly.
Okay.
It involves creating structured dialogue spaces where opposing groups can share their narratives without debate, focusing purely on acknowledging mutual trauma and fostering forgiveness.
Wow. And when you multiply the foundation D and P by these four pillars line, the result of the equation is 2D, right?
Yes. Comprehensive physical, mental, and social development.
I really appreciate the structure of that equation. But the text highlights a specific insight from her fieldwork that I struggle with it a bit.
Which part?
It says that across different cultures, the ethical leader was found to be the most critical enabler. It almost suggests that without that ethical leader, the whole process fails.
That's right.
I hear that, but doesn't relying so heavily on one leader create a massive single point of failure?
It's a valid worry.
Because in modern sociology, we're constantly taught that grassroots networks, the N, are what create sustainable change. If you rely on a single ethical leader and they step down or get compromised, doesn't the entire peace process just collapse?
It's a completely valid concern. And honestly, it's exactly why the network is included right next to it in the equation. But if we think back to the Papanyaka.
Those systemic proliferators like conceit and craving.
Right. We have to remember that a grassroots network is really just a collection of individuals who are all highly susceptible to those exact defilements.
Ah, right. A network can become an echo chamber of fixed views just as easily as an individual can.
Exactly. The insight from the fieldwork is that a grassroots network provides the reach and the resilience, but it needs an initial stabilizing gravity.
And the ethical leader provides that gravity.
Yes, an ethical leader who genuinely models nonviolence and self-awareness acts as that gravity. They set the cultural tone that prevents the network from turning on itself or fracturing into tribalism.
So the leader doesn't necessarily do all the work, but they create the ethical safe space where the network can actually function.
They hold the space so the network can grow. That's a great way to summarize it.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Well, we've really covered a mass amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by looking at how Buddha Panya completely redefines the researcher, requiring them to turn the lens inward and calibrate their own biases.
And we saw how a spiritual concept like the Four Noble Truths maps flawlessly onto the structure of a modern academic thesis.
We also explored the diagnostic mechanics separating individual greed and delusion from systemic conceit and fixed views.
Plus how the four right efforts guide a researcher to apply the exact right intervention at the exact right time.
And seeing it all culminate in the DNP line model really proves that this isn't just theory. It's an empirical, highly effective methodology for community development that transforms the conflict, the community, and the researcher all at once.
It is a truly remarkable framework, and as we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
Throughout this deep dive, we focused on applying this methodology to academic fieldwork and large-scale societal peacebuilding. But what if we applied this exact framework to the microscopic conflicts in our own daily lives?
Oh, this is going to be challenging, isn't it?
Think back to that personal conflict you brought to mind at the very beginning of our conversation. The next time you are trying to research a solution to a frustrating dynamic at your job or an ongoing argument in your relationship, what would happen if you completely changed your methodology?
Okay.
Before you gathered a single data point on everything the other person did wrong, what if you were required to first sit down and rigorously document your own Kelisa?
Wow. So having to write a literature review on your own defilements before you're allowed to speak.
Exactly. What if you had to identify your own greed, your own need for status, or your own absolute refusal to listen to their perspective?
If you actually calibrated your own internal thermometer first, how radically would that change your intervention?
Probably completely.
That's a mirror I think we could all stand to look into a little more often. It turns out, whether you're trying to heal a fractured nation or just trying to navigate a frustrating conversation with a coworker, the diagnostic process doesn't start with pointing the microscope at them.
It starts by pointing it at yourself.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into Dr. Khanthong's incredible work. Keep questioning the world around you, and we'll see you next time.